My name is Valentina Cruz. I am 36 years old, and for most of my adult life I believed that in a family business, the work was the argument. That if you showed up every day and did the thing that needed doing, did it well, did it without complaint, did it in the dark when no one was watching, the record would eventually speak for itself. I spent 12 years building that record. Then I watched my father hand everything it had produced to my brother, set a place for me at the celebration dinner, and assume I would sit down quietly and eat. I need to tell you what the business was because it matters. Cruz Architectural Group had been my father's firm since he founded it in 1994 out of a two-room office on Peachtree Industrial Boulevard in Atlanta, Georgia, with one drafting table, two clients, and a reputation built on the kind of meticulous residential work that gets passed between neighbors by word of mouth. My father, Ernesto Cruz, was a genuinely gifted designer. The kind of architect who understood proportion the way musicians understand pitch, instinctively in his body before his mind caught up. He had built the firm on that gift, and by the time I was old enough to understand what he did, Cruz Architectural Group had 12 full-time staff, a portfolio of commercial and residential projects across the Atlanta metro area, and a name that meant something in certain rooms. I grew up in those rooms. I grew up on job sites, in client meetings my father brought me to because he said watching people was an education you couldn't get in a classroom. I grew up understanding floor plans the way other children understood picture books, as a natural language, a system for describing how people move through space. By the time I was 16, I had already decided I was going to be an architect. By the time I was 22, I had my bachelor's degree in architecture from Georgia Tech and was sitting for my licensure exams. By the time I was 25 I was licensed, employed at Cruz Architectural Group, and working 70-hour weeks on a mixed-use development in Buckhead that my father had landed but that I, functionally, was running. My father came to the site reviews. He shook hands with the developer. He had opinions about the lobby fenestration that were sometimes right and sometimes not, and either way I incorporated his notes and kept moving. That was the arrangement. Not stated, not negotiated, just the water we swam in, the way families have arrangements that are never spoken because speaking them would require acknowledging what they actually are. If you have ever been the person in your family who just handled it, who got the call at 7 in the morning when something went wrong, who stayed until the problem was solved, who never needed to be asked twice, then you know the particular quality of silence I am describing. It is not dramatic. Nobody is cruel to you in any moment you could point to and say, there, that one, that is where it happened. It accumulates instead, the way sediment accumulates, until one day you realize the ground beneath you is not what you thought it was. My brother Daniel was 4 years younger than me and had joined the firm 3 years after I did. He was personable and quick and had an instinct for clients that was genuinely useful, the ability to read what someone wanted before they had fully articulated it, to make them feel understood in the way that makes people sign contracts. He was not a strong technical architect. He knew this about himself, which I respected. What I did not fully reckon with, for longer than I should have, was that my father did not know it, or had decided at some point that it did not matter as much as other things. Things like Daniel's ease in a room. Things like the fact that Daniel carried the Cruz name the way my father had always imagined it being carried forward, loudly, visibly, with a handshake and a smile and no particular need to explain the details to anyone. The details were my department. The first time my father made the structure visible I was 27, and we were in his office on the 4th floor of our building on West Peachtree Street. A corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Midtown Atlanta, the kind of view that my father had earned and that I had always privately loved. I had been working on a proposal for 4 weeks. Not a design proposal, a business proposal. I had identified that Cruz Architectural Group was consistently losing competitive bids on mid-size commercial projects, not because our design work was inferior, but because our project management infrastructure was. We were running every project on a combination of spreadsheets, email threads, and institutional memory that lived largely in my head, and the result was that our bid timelines were slower than our competitors and our change order documentation was inconsistent enough that we had eaten 2 significant cost overruns in the past 18 months. I had researched project management platforms, interviewed 3 vendors, run a cost-benefit analysis against our last 8 commercial projects, and put together a 30-page proposal recommending a specific platform with a phased implementation plan, a training schedule, and a projected reduction in project overhead of approximately 18% annually. 18% of our commercial project overhead was not a trivial number. It was, by my calculation, roughly $220,000 a year. I set it on my father's desk. He turned the pages the way he turned pages, quickly, without stopping, getting an impression rather than reading. "You've been busy," he said. "The change order issue is going to cost us again on the Marietta project if we don't address the documentation system," I said. "This platform fixes that and a lot more." He set the proposal down and looked at me with an expression that was fond and faintly amused, the way you look at a child who has built something elaborate out of blocks. "Valentina," he said, "you know what this firm runs on? Relationships. I have been in this business for 30 years and I have never once won a project because of a software platform." "You've lost projects because of documentation gaps," I said. "I can show you the numbers." "Numbers," he said, the way someone says a word that means less to them than it does to you. "Daniel had lunch with the Forsyth County Development Director last week. That's a relationship. That's how we grow." I looked at him. "The Forsyth meeting came from a referral I cultivated with the Hensley Group last year," I said. "I can show you that chain too if it's useful." He smiled. "You're the best analyst I have," he said. "You know that. But there's more to running a firm than analysis." I picked up my proposal from the corner of his desk. I tapped it once against my palm to straighten the pages. "Of course," I said. I went back to my office. I sat down. I looked at the midtown skyline through my own window, which was smaller than his and faced north instead of west. Then I opened the Marietta project file and kept working. The proposal went into my desk drawer. 6 months later, the Marietta change order issue cost us $34,000 in absorbed overruns, exactly as I had projected. My father did not connect the two things. Or if he did not say so. The pattern that followed was consistent and quiet. Anything I brought formally was received as evidence of my analytical nature, a compliment delivered in the register of a limitation. Anything Daniel mentioned in passing became a direction worth exploring. I watched this happen across 4 years with the particular clarity of someone who has understood the mechanism and has not yet decided what to do about it. I kept building the record. I told myself the record was enough. The thing about telling yourself the record is enough is that you can tell yourself that for a very long time before you find out whether it is true. The years between 27 and 34 are, when I look at them now, the years I built Cruz Architectural Group into what it became, and the years my father was building a different story about who had done that. I want to account for them specifically. When I was 28, I managed the largest project in the firm's history to that point, a 40,000 square foot mixed-use development in Buckhead for a developer named Hartwell Properties. The project ran 18 months. It involved 14 consultants for municipal permit processes across 2 jurisdictions, and a mid-project ownership change on the client side that required us to essentially represent the entire design rationale to a new decision-maker who had different priorities than the original one. I managed every one of those threads. I was the person the contractor called when the structural engineer and the MEP engineer disagreed about a coordination issue that was threatening to put us 2 weeks behind schedule. I resolved it in a conference call on a Tuesday afternoon by having read both engineers' specifications closely enough to identify where the conflict had originated and propose a solution neither of them had considered. The Buckhead project came in on time and $80,000 under the client's contingency budget. Hartwell Properties sent a letter of commendation to my father. They requested Cruz Architectural Group specifically for their next development, a $3.2 million office park in Sandy Springs, and they cited the quality of project management as the primary reason. My father framed the letter and put it in the reception area. He thanked Daniel for being such a strong presence at the client relationship dinners. Daniel had attended 4 dinners over the course of 18 months. He had not been in a single coordination meeting. When I was 30, I rebuilt our consultant network almost entirely after our primary structural engineering partner of 8 years dissolved following the retirement of its founding principal. Losing that relationship mid-year meant we had 3 active projects without a structural engineer of record and a 4th project about to go into permit. I identified and vetted 4 replacement firms in 3 weeks, negotiated fee structures with 2 of them simultaneously, and had all 4 active projects covered within 30 days. The disruption was invisible to our clients. The cost of the transition, new agreements, overlap coordination, expedited onboarding, came in at $12,000. My estimate of what unmanaged disruption would have cost in delayed permits and client penalties was closer to $200,000. My father learned about the consultant transition when it was complete. He said, "Good," and asked whether I had confirmed the catering for an industry reception he was hosting the following week. When I was 32, I hired and built out the project management team that transformed how the firm operated: 3 project managers, a document control coordinator, and the software platform I had proposed 4 years earlier, which I implemented quietly, incrementally, without ever calling it what it was or referencing the proposal my father had not read. By the end of the first full year with the new infrastructure, our bid timelines had dropped by 30% and our change order documentation rate had improved enough that we recovered $140,000 in previously absorbed costs across 2 commercial projects. I wrote the result up in a 1-page internal summary and put it in the operations file. My father did not read the operations file. The second incident I need to account for happened when I was 33, a year before the dinner. My father called me into the corner office. He was 71. He had slowed down over the past 2 years in the way that gifted people slow down when the part of the work they love, the pure design, the pencil on paper, the proportion, becomes harder to sustain at the pace the business requires. He was still the best designer in the firm. He came in 4 days a week. He was present at every client presentation. But the operational weight of the firm had shifted, and both of us knew where it had shifted to, even if only one of us ever said it aloud. "I've been thinking about the future," he said. He said it with the gravity of a man who has rehearsed the sentence. Something tightened in my chest, not with hope exactly, but with the specific alertness of someone who has been waiting a long time for a particular conversation and is not sure yet whether this is it. "Daniel should start taking a principal role," my father said. "I want to make it official. Give him a title. Let the clients see that this firm has a future." I kept my hands still on the arms of the chair. "What title?" I asked. "Principal. Maybe managing principal. Something that tells people he's the one carrying this forward." "And my title?" I said. He waved a hand. "You're the backbone, Valentina. Everyone knows that. But Daniel is the face. A firm needs a face." I looked at the view through his window. The Atlanta skyline in the afternoon light, the particular blue of a Georgia October sky behind the Midtown towers. "I'll think about what that looks like structurally," I said. He smiled. "I knew you'd understand," he said. "You always understand." I folded the notepad I had brought with me in half and held it against my knee. "Of course," I said. I had already by that point been quietly doing something for 3 months that my father did not know about. I did not accelerate it after that conversation. I simply continued. The dinner was my father's idea, and it was Daniel's dinner in every way except the one that would have mattered, the organizational reality underneath the celebration. My father announced it at a Sunday lunch at the family house in Decatur, a formal dinner to introduce Daniel to the firm's key clients, consultants, and industry contacts as the incoming managing principal of Cruz Architectural Group. He had already booked a private dining room at Seraph, a restaurant in Buckhead that charged $195 per person for a set menu and had exactly the kind of quiet, serious elegance that Atlanta's architecture and development community understood as a signal of substance. 40 guests. Seated dinner. My father would give remarks. He looked at me across the lunch table when he said the part about the remarks. "I'll need your help with the guest list," he said. "You know everyone." I did know everyone. I knew everyone because I had spent 9 years cultivating those relationships on behalf of the firm: the developers, the consultants, the permit expediters, the contractor principals, the client contacts who had become something closer to professional friendships over the course of long projects managed carefully. Every person my father planned to seat in that private dining room at Seraph was there because of work I had done. Several of them, if asked, would have said they thought of me as their primary contact at Cruz Architectural Group. Some of them would have been surprised to learn that Daniel was being positioned above me. "Of course," I said. My mother, sitting at the other end of the table, looked at me with an expression I had spent 36 years learning to read. She saw it. She had always seen it. She said nothing, the way she had said nothing for 30 years, and I did not blame her for it because I understood the particular calculus of a woman who has built her life inside a structure she did not design and has made her peace with the parts she cannot change. Over the following 3 weeks I built the guest list. I drafted the invitation language. I confirmed the dietary restrictions with Seraph's event coordinator, a woman named Claire who had worked with me on 2 previous cruise client events and who addressed all her questions to me by name. I coordinated the audiovisual setup for my father's remarks. I reviewed the seating chart twice, balancing relationship dynamics I understood in detail because I had been the one managing them. Daniel called me midway through the planning process. He was in good spirits, the way Daniel was always in good spirits, an easy, unexamined warmth that I had never been able to fully resent because it was genuine. "Val," he said, "this is going to be incredible. Dad is really excited." "It'll be a good evening," I said. "You're doing all the heavy lifting as usual. I owe you one." "You owe me several," I said, and I said it lightly, the way you say something true when you have decided to let it sit in the register of a joke. He laughed. "Fair enough," he said. "See you Saturday." The week before the dinner I did 2 things. The first was what everyone expected. I confirmed the final head count with Seraph, reviewed the run of show with my father, and made sure the evening was going to proceed exactly as he had envisioned it. The second thing I did was drive to the offices of Reyes and Holloway, a business law firm on Piedmont Road, where I had been meeting with an attorney named Patricia Reyes for the past 4 months. On the night of the dinner I dressed carefully. I wore a jacket I had bought specifically for the occasion, charcoal, structured, the kind of thing that reads as authoritative without announcing itself. I drove to Seraph alone. I arrived 12 minutes before the guests, which meant I arrived before Daniel and before my father, because I had built the timeline and I knew that 12 minutes before guests was when the room needed someone to be there. I confirmed the table settings with Claire. I checked the AV. I walked the room once, the way I walked every room I had managed, methodically, checking sight lines and traffic flow, and when I was satisfied I stood near the entrance and greeted the first guests as they arrived. When my father came in, he looked around the room and his face did the thing it did when something had been handled well, a brief, satisfied nod, almost unconscious, the acknowledgement of a man who had known the thing would be handled because it always was. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder. "Perfect," he said. "Thank you," I said. I was carrying a leather portfolio under my arm. My father's eyes did not go to it. There was no reason they would. I carried a portfolio to most things. It was part of how I was understood, Valentina, always prepared, always organized, always with the folder that had what you needed in it. Dinner proceeded exactly as planned. My father's remarks came between the first and second courses. He spoke about legacy, about what it meant to build something and then have the courage to trust the next generation with it. He spoke about Daniel's gifts, his instincts, his presence, his ability to make clients feel seen. He used the word vision 3 times. He did not use my name. Daniel stood when my father introduced him, and the room applauded, and Daniel said a few words that were warm and genuine and well received, and the evening moved forward in the way that well-managed evenings move forward, smoothly, on schedule, with a quality of effortlessness that is only possible because someone has done an enormous amount of work to produce it. I sat at a table with 3 of our consultant contacts, the structural engineer from the firm I had onboarded 2 years ago, our primary MEP consultant, and a developer I had worked with on 2 projects. All 3 of them had worked with me directly. None of them had worked with Daniel in any technical capacity. After dessert, as the room shifted into the standing portion of the evening, my father found me near the window. "Wonderful," he said. He was flushed and pleased. "Just wonderful, Valentina. You made this happen." "I did," I said. He either didn't notice the absence of thank you or chose not to. "The bill will come to us from Seraph," he said, lowering his voice slightly. 40 covers at $195 plus the private room fee. Around $9,000. Just handle it the way you handle things, yes. He said it the way you say don't forget to lock up, automatic, comfortable, addressed to the person who is always locked up. I looked at him for a moment. Something that had been quietly finishing its process for 4 months arrived, in that moment, at whatever it had been becoming. "Of course," I said. He moved back toward Daniel and the guests. I stayed by the window for a moment, the leather portfolio against my side, the sounds of the room around me. Then I took my phone from my pocket and sent one text message to Patricia Reyes. "We're ready," it said. Patricia Reyes met me at Seraph at 9:15. The dinner guests were still present. maybe 2/3 of them, the ones who had moved into the standing reception portion of the evening with glasses of wine and the particular ease of people who have eaten well and are in no hurry. The private dining room had doors that opened onto a small corridor, and Patricia came through those doors in a dark blazer with a leather briefcase and the composed, unhurried manner of a woman who has walked into difficult rooms before and found them manageable. I met her in the corridor. She handed me a folder, letter-sized, cream-colored, the kind of unremarkable folder that could contain anything or nothing. I put it inside my portfolio. "Everything is in order," she said. "Thank you," I said. "Give me 10 minutes." I went back into the dining room. My father was near the far end, talking to a developer I recognized from the Hartwell Properties referral chain, a man named Gerald Osei who had worked with me on the Sandy Springs project and who, I knew, thought highly of the firm's project management. Daniel was across the room, easy and animated, the way Daniel always was in rooms like this one. My mother was seated at the family table with a cup of coffee, watching the room the way she always watched rooms, quietly, completely, missing nothing. I crossed to my father and waited for a natural pause in his conversation. "Dad," I said, "could I have a few minutes? There's something I need to show you before the evening ends." He looked at me with the comfortable attention of a man whose evening had gone perfectly. "Of course," he said. He excused himself from Gerald with a handshake and followed me to the small seating area at the near end of the room, a cluster of chairs slightly apart from the main reception. Daniel saw us move and came across. I had not asked him to, but I did not send him away. The three of us sat. I set my portfolio on the low table between us and opened it. I took out the folder Patricia had given me and placed it on the table. "What is this?" my father said. "A business conversation," I said. "One I should have started a year ago." I opened the folder. The first document was a 31-page operational audit prepared by Reyes and Holloway, covering Cruz Architectural Group's project performance from 2015 to the present. Every major project. Revenue generated. Margin achieved. Consultant relationships maintained. Permit timelines managed. Change order recoveries. Staff hired and retained. The name that appeared most frequently as the responsible party across all of it was mine. I placed it in front of my father without comment and let him look at the first page. His eyes moved across the numbers. He turned to the second page. His expression did not change immediately. It shifted slowly, the way light shifts in a room when a cloud moves, gradual enough that you notice it only after it has already happened. "I also need to tell you something," I said. "Over the past 4 months, with Patricia's help, I have formalized my standing with the firm in a way that wasn't formalized before." I placed the second document on the table. It was a 2-page letter from Reyes and Holloway addressed to my father, outlining that I had, through a legal process Patricia had guided carefully and precisely, secured documentation of my operational contributions sufficient to support a claim of equitable interest in Cruz Architectural Group, and that I was prepared to file that claim formally if we could not reach a partnership agreement through other means. I was not bluffing. Patricia had told me that plainly in our third meeting. "This is a real position, Valentina. The record you have built supports it. But the cleaner outcome is a negotiated agreement, and that's what we're going to try for first." My father picked up the letter. He read it. He read it again. The color in his face did something I watched carefully, not draining exactly, but reorganizing, the way a face reorganizes when it is processing something it was not prepared to receive. Daniel said, "Val, what?" "Let him read it," I said quietly. My father set the letter down. He looked at me across the table, and for the first time in my memory he looked at me the way you look at someone when you have been suddenly and completely unsure of what you are seeing. "You've been planning this," he said. "I've been protecting myself," I said. "There's a difference." "This is," he stopped. He looked at the audit again, at the first page with its columns of figures and project names and dates. "Why didn't you just talk to me?" I kept my voice level. "I tried," I said. "When I was 27, I brought you a proposal that would have saved us $220,000 a year. You told me I thought too much like an accountant. When I was 33, I asked you what my role would be in the transition. You told me Daniel is the vision and I am the engine." He started to say something. I continued. "Tonight you asked me to pay a $9,000 bill for Daniel's party. The party where you announced that this firm is his. You asked me the way you ask me to handle things, automatically without discussion, because that is what I do. I paused. So I am asking you a question I should have asked a long time ago. If this firm belongs to Daniel, why would I pay for his party? And if it doesn't only belong to Daniel, if 12 years of what I have built here means something, then I need that in writing. The room continued around us, 40 people talking and moving and finishing their wine, none of them aware that the actual business of the evening was happening in this small cluster of chairs near the entrance. Daniel looked at the audit. He turned a page. His face had gone very still in a way I had not seen on him before, not Daniel's usual ease, but something underneath it, something that looked like the particular stillness of a person revising a story they have held a long time. I didn't know the numbers, he said. Not to defend himself. Just as a fact. I know, I said. My father's hands were flat on his knees. He was looking at me with an expression I did not have a name for, not anger, not shame, something more complicated than either, the expression of a man encountering a version of his own history that has been documented with more precision than he had ever applied to it himself. What do you want? He said. A real partnership, I said. Equity. A title that reflects what I actually do. A formal structure drawn up by Patricia's firm that protects both of us going forward. That's all. I closed the portfolio. I left the audit and the letter on the table. Patricia is available to meet with your attorney this week, I said. Whenever you're ready. My father called me the next morning at 7:45. He did not open with pleasantries. He said, "Can you come to the house?" And I said yes, and I drove to Decatur in the thin early light of a November morning with the heat on and the radio off. My mother opened the door. She looked at me for a moment before she said anything, and what she said was, "I made coffee." Which was not about the coffee. We sat in the living room, my father in the armchair he had owned for 20 years, Daniel on the couch, my mother in the chair by the window with her coffee cup held in both hands. The Reyes and Holloway documents were on the coffee table. My father had clearly been reading them since the night before. "I want to understand," my father said, "what you think I have done." I had thought about how to answer this. I had thought about it for 4 months in Patricia's office and before that for years in quieter ways, and I had decided that the only useful answer was the precise one. "When I was 27, I said, "you told me I think too much like an accountant. You said it after I brought you a proposal that would have saved this firm over $200,000 a year in project overhead. You did not read the proposal. You turned the pages and set it down." He was quiet. "What I was actually doing when you said that," I said, "was running the Buckhead project, 18 months, 14 consultants, 2 jurisdictions, a mid-project ownership change. I brought it in on time and $80,000 under contingency. The client cited project management as the reason they came back to us for a $3.2 million follow-on contract. The word accountant was not the right word for what I was doing." Daniel looked at the table. "When I was 33, I said, you told me Daniel is the vision and I am the engine. You said it like it settled something. Like the categories were obvious and fixed and had always been that way." I paused. What I was actually doing at that point was running a project management infrastructure I had built over 2 years, quietly without a formal mandate, using a platform you had declined to approve 6 years earlier. That infrastructure had recovered $140,000 in costs in its first full year. The engine, as you called it, was the reason the firm could take on the volume it was taking on. My father's jaw moved, but he did not speak. "And last night," I said, "after I planned and managed a dinner for 40 people that cost $9,000 and that showcased relationships I have been building for 9 years, you asked me to pay the bill. For Daniel's party. You asked me the way you ask someone to handle something small and obvious, because in your mind that is the category I have always been in. The person who handles things." I stopped. The room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet when something true has been said in them and everyone present knows it. "I handled things," I said. "For 12 years. I handled the Buckhead project and the consultant transition and the permit crises and the software implementation and every change order and every relationship and every problem that came through this firm before you knew it was a problem. I did not do that to be handled in return." Daniel said very quietly, "Dad." My father looked at the documents on the table. He looked at them for a long time. Then he said, "I'll call my attorney today." I stood up. I picked up my bag from the floor. Patricia's number is on the letter, I said. My mother walked me to the door. She did not say anything until we were on the front step, and then she put her hand briefly on my arm and said, "He sees it now." "I know," I said. "He should have seen it before." "Yes," I said. "He should have." I walked to my car. I did not look back at the house. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment with my hands in my lap, and something in my chest that had been held at a particular tension for a very long time released, quietly and without drama, like a knot that has finally been worked loose. The partnership agreement took 6 weeks to negotiate and another 2 to finalize. I came out of it with a 40% equity stake in Cruz Architectural Group, the title of managing principal, the same title my father had assigned to Daniel at the dinner, and a formal operational authority structure that put both of us in named roles with defined responsibilities and decision rights. Daniel's title remained. His role remained. The things he was genuinely good at were still valued and still needed. What changed was that the things I was good at were now on paper. Documented. Protected. No longer available to be relied upon silently and credited elsewhere. My father and I have not fully returned to what we were before, and I think that is honest. Something shifted in how he sees me, and something shifted in how I allow myself to be seen, and those two shifts are not yet entirely comfortable with each other. We are working on it. We have Sunday lunch most weeks. He asks about projects. He listens differently now, with a quality of attention that feels new, or maybe not new but newly directed toward me in the way it had always been directed toward Daniel, and I am still learning what to do with that. Daniel and I are fine. We were always fine in the ways that siblings are fine when the problem between them was never really between them at all. What I think about when I think about those 12 years is not the injustice of it, though it was unjust and I do not minimize that. What I think about is the long, quiet work of believing that the record speaks for itself, and the longer, quieter work of learning that it doesn't. The record is evidence. It is not an argument until you make it one. Nobody is going to walk into the room where you have been working in the dark and turn the lights on for you. That is not how rooms work. That is not how families work. That is not, in my experience, how anything works. The moment I set those documents on the table at Seraph was not the moment I became someone who demanded to be seen. It was the moment I stopped waiting for someone else to do the seeing. If that lands somewhere in you, if you have been the engine in a room full of people celebrating the vision, if you have been handling things so long that the handling has become invisible, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the most useful thing you can give someone is proof that the moment arrives. That you can be the one who decides when. I will leave the debate for you. When a family member builds something for decades without recognition, is a legal claim the right move, or is there always a better way to have that conversation first? This is a fictional story created for entertainment purposes. Names, characters, events, and details are products of the imagination and do not represent any real persons or situations.